Welcome to my very first Iceberg type video, where I'll talk about the topic of giants. When I mean by giants, I mean the mythological, historical, and modern accounts of giants. I made this iceberg because surprisingly there weren't any on this topic that I could find, and I thought this topic is very interesting once you go deeper, as almost every culture has a story about giant humans roaming around in their history. Obviously, if you're familiar with iceberg type videos, you know how this works. But for the people who don't, the top layer is more well known and common knowledge about the topic. And as you go more down the list, the information becomes more obscure. Personally, I think I covered this specific topic extensively, but I do feel like I'm missing a handful of entries. But without further ado, this is the Giants Iceberg. In Greek mythology, Titans were the gods before the Olympians, until the Olympians overthrew them, and kept them in the underworld called Tartarus. The Titans were the descendants of primordial gods Gaia and Uranus, which included Prometheus, Atlas, Cronus, and many more. Titans are mostly known from Greek mythology as being immortal giants, being depicted so in ancient art. I mostly know them because I played the God of War games, especially in God of War 3 where you see most of them depicted, and the word Titan is mostly used to describe somebody who is gigantic in size and power. Cyclops are a race of one-eyed giants in Greek legends. They're mostly known from Homer's Odyssey, where they're depicted as a sheep-herding giant, who traps and eats Odysseus' men when landing on his island. Then Odysseus tricking the Cyclops to get drunk to let his guard down, and blinding the Cyclops with a wooden stake, giving a chance for Odysseus and his men to escape. Cyclops are well known in fantasy settings and are commonly depicted as strong giants who are seen as barbaric monsters, or sometimes as really good at craftsmanship, as they're referenced to have made Zeus' lightning bolt to help defeat and overthrow the Titans. Goliath was a giant that was defeated by David in the book of Samuel. Goliath's height was described as 4 cubits and a span, which was 6 feet 9 inches, but other texts describe bigger numbers. Goliath in the book of Samuel is the champion of the Philistines who challenges David to combat. And David surprisingly beats Goliath by slinging a rock at Goliath's head, knocking him down, and David proceeding to decapitate him, making David the victor. Goliath's story is one of the most known biblical stories, and it's also another well-known depiction of a giant. Compared to the other two entries, Goliath's height seems possible for its time, but that won't stop people from using him as a reference or example for the later entries in this iceberg. Paul Bunyan is a giant lumberjack and folk hero in America, where he is mostly known for his many stories of shaping the American landscape, and is accompanied by his giant blue ox named Babe. The folklore of Paul Bunyan originated from American loggers in the 1900s, who would tell stories of this giant man who could clear a whole forest with a swing of his axe. It's been debated if Paul Bunyan was based on any real person, but considering his stories have been passed down orally in bunkhouses and campfires, it's hard to tell. Paul was described as 7 feet tall with a 7 feet stride. His gigantic stature could probably give people the impression that he had immense strength. Nowadays, Paul Bunyan is mostly seen as an American folk hero like Johnny Appleseed and Davy Crockett. Ogres are described in European folklore as hideous giants that have an appetite for human flesh, specifically children. Varying in sizes from human height to giants, in folklore they're seen as villains and instill fear in kids who don't behave, as it may be the next meal for an ogre. Another entry I'm putting here is the Oni, which is basically the Japanese version of the ogre, as ogre and Oni is roughly translated to mean demon, as they are seen as bad omens that should be driven away. Similarly, like the Cyclops, ogres nowadays are mostly depicted in fantasy settings and are mostly portrayed as monsters or lovers. In Norse mythology, trolls are human-like giants that can use magic. They vary in sizes and features, mostly being depicted as having a large nose, being as giant as a mountain, or as no taller than humans, sometimes with multiple heads and living out in the wilderness. Trolls also have an innate hate for Christians. This probably stems from the folklore around the Middle Ages describing trolls as not Christianized, whatever that means. Trolls also have the same weakness as vampires, as trolls have a weakness towards sunlight, exploding or turning to stone from direct sunlight. Nowadays, trolls are seen in pop culture and in fairy tales, as a more friendly creature than their mythological depictions. I personally like the movie Troll Hunters, as they depict trolls from Norwegian folktales as more interesting and terrifying than whatever this is. Gigantism is a very rare condition that happens when a child or adolescent has high levels of growth hormones in their body, which causes them to grow very tall. I put this entry here because I think this is the most likely idea of where stories of giants could have came from, as in the past, ancient people didn't have the knowledge that people who had gigantism weren't these mythical beings but people with a condition, and in the modern day we now know what causes this, and how people who have it have a history of health conditions that come with it, as Robert Wadlow, the tallest person recorded at 8 feet 11 inches, suffered from multiple health conditions, wearing leg braces and using canes to support his weight and height, as people with gigantism put extra stress on their heart and bones when maintaining a large body. I think the stories of giants could stem from ancient people seeing people with gigantism and over embellishing them in their stories, but who truly knows? Laestrygonians, like the Cyclops, are mostly known from Homer's Odyssey, as a tribe of man-eating giants that Odysseus comes across. The Laestrygonians are less known, but they don't differ from the Cyclops. After Odysseus' men realize that the island's inhabitants are man-eating giants, the giants are described as throwing rocks at ships and destroying them, and even spearing the men like fish, painting a pretty horrifying image. And I think this occurs after Odysseus dealt with the Cyclops earlier. The leading theory behind the idea of a race of giants that inhabited the islands near Italy in Greek legends is that ancient Greek sailors came across the giants of Monte Plama, which are these 8-foot tall statues that are found in Sardinia. The Nuragic civilization, who is believed to have made these statues, have no written record of their civilization, so the only people who did write about them is the Greeks and Romans, who most likely over-embellish in these stories about the Nuragic civilization, probably describing them as a race of man-eating giants, but this is just a theory. This is a reference to the legend surrounding the Giant's Causeway, which is this geological marble that have these basalt columns that are these hexagonal shaped stepping stones that were formed 60 million years ago by volcanic activity. But the myth tells a different story. In a nutshell, the myth goes that these stones were placed there because two giants were shit talking to each other across the northern channel, and one giant decided to place those stones to go across the channel for some ass whooping, and after the skirmish, the stone bridge was destroyed, leaving what we see now as the myth says. I think this is another not well known myth of giants, and it's personally one of my first myths I learned when I was younger, and introduced me to the topic of mythology like the Minotaur and others. The dwarf elephant skull theory is a theory that says that maybe the ancient Greeks misinterpreted dwarf elephant bones as bones of a giant or cyclops, specifically the pygmy elephant skull, which have these smaller eye sockets compared to the large nasal cavity caused by the trunk. This theory has been proposed to be the explanation behind the Cyclops myth, but lacks any true link. It's more of a guess really, as we don't know if the ancient Greeks knew the existence of dwarf elephants or what they knew about the fossils. Who knows? In Welsh and English mythology, Gog Magog was a giant that inhabited the land of Albion, which is now known as the United Kingdom. The legend goes that Gog Magog was the last remnants of a mythical race of giants that ruled the land. Described as 13 feet tall with immense strength, Gog Magog in the legend is captured and later defeated by Corineus, who later would be the first king of Cornwall. I added this entry because it adds to this weird idea of legends of islands or lands that are inhabited by giants that are hostile to visitors. Gog Magog's legend is almost similar to Polyphemus in Greek mythology, and I find that kinda interesting. This is a reference to the idea that ancient people didn't have knowledge of what fossils were, and interpreted them as bones of monsters and giants of legends. This theory is kinda tossed in for explaining how legends of giants came from, but it doesn't hold much since it doesn't have much evidence behind it. Mainly because we don't have any definitive proof how ancient people interpreted them. The interesting thing about this idea is that most legends of giants talk about them in the sense of them being in the past, as if giants were this extinct species that went out centuries ago or was taken out by humans ages ago. And maybe the discovery of fossils by ancient people will have added evidence to their legends, but who truly knows? In the Hebrew Bible, the Nephilim were a race of giants that were a result of fallen angels having kids with human women in biblical times. It's been disputed what the Nephilim were and what even the word Nephilim means, but the reference in Genesis, the Book of Numbers, and the Book of Enoch. In the Book of Enoch, they're described as great giants whose height was 300 cubits. By that description, they will clocked in at a height of 450 feet, which kinda makes them into kaijus in a way. They are referenced sparsely in the Bible and other books, but they're mostly known for being wiped out during the Great Flood while Noah was in his ark. But other texts say they survived the flood, still roaming around. Many conspiracy theories have risen about the Nephilim, mostly about them still being around or once existing in the past. Referencing the Nephilim in the Bible as proof of a race of giants existing and them being involved in some greater conspiracy, but later entries will go more into this topic, so on to the next tier. The Seetah were a tribe of red-haired cannibalistic giants that were at odds with the Paiutes, a Native American tribe indigenous to parts of Nevada. Through the oral history of the Paiutes, the Seetah translated meant tool eaters. Tool was this fibrous water plant that was believed that the giants will weave a raft out of. The history goes that the Paiutes were at war with these giants, and the Paiutes will end up victorious, as the last of the giants were taken out at Lovelock Cave, as the Paiutes started a fire to smoke out the remaining giants in the cave, leading to their extinction. The Lovelock Cave will be later excavated by archaeologists, which led to them finding many ancient artifacts, like duck decoys, slings, and 60 mummies. But other claims say that the remains of a red-haired giant were found, but there is no evidence backing that up. The Seetah are sometimes more described as barbaric than giants, but that doesn't stop conspiracy theories from using the Seetah as evidence of this idea that giants once ruled the world. And as we go down the list, we're going to see more wacky conspiracy theories that involve giants. Queen-Metzum were a race of giants in Aztec mythology. Described as 10 feet tall, they were described as to have lived before the creation of humans, and were wiped out because they didn't venerate the gods. They are credited to building the pyramids of Cholula and the great city of Teotihuacan. Since the Spanish conquest of Mesoamerica, it is believed that the reports of giant bones associated with the giants are believed to be misinterpreted dinosaur bones. Also, the city of Teotihuacan has a lot of mystery revolving around who built them, so it's believed in legend that giants built these grand pyramids long time ago. I like the fact that no matter where you go in the world, there's myths of giants building these grand cities or monuments. It's an interesting concept that ancient people came up with to explain how some great cities were built in the ancient world. The San Diego Giant was a mummy found in San Diego, California in 1895. Labeled as the tallest human that ever lived by exhibitors, the mummy was measured to be 8 feet 4 inches and claimed to be found in a cave in San Diego. The Smithsonian will later take an interest in this mummy by sending a team to investigate it in 1908. The Smithsonian will come back with a sample of dry skin that concluded that the mummy was a hoax, as the sample results showed it was composed of gelatin. It's not known if the exhibitors knew it was fake, as the exhibitors bought it and displayed it without doing their research. This image always shows up in conspiracy theories involving giants as proof of some wacky theory, but knowing that it's a hoax kinda discredits these goofy theories of giants. Another supposed giant, but this time in Cardiff, New York. In 1869, a man named George Hull found a petrified giant while digging to make a well. The giant was at a height of 10 feet and weighed in at 3,000 pounds. At the time, it was believed the giant was the supposed giant of biblical time, the Nephilim. The giant would be later bought by an exhibitor that would display it and give it more attention. A few months later, George Hull will spill the beans and confess that the giant was a hoax. The giant was a creation of George to show on how easy it is to fake something and to prove an argument. As George was an atheist, George had a disagreement with a reverend around Genesis 6:4, which talks about the Nephilim. He was so salty about the argument that he spent roughly $57,000 of his own money to sculpt this giant, and burying it underground to later dig it back up. It wasn't really much of a bad idea, as the giant raked in roughly $500,000 for George and probably more for the exhibitors. Nowadays, the Cardiff giant is currently in the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Giant human skeleton photos is a reference to the many altered and faked images of archaeological sites depicting bones of giants. These images always show up in conspiracy theories involving giants or Nephilim. Some do look convincing, but like most conspiracy theories, these images barely have any sources to back them up. And sometimes you can find the original image it was taken from. Most of them are clearly photoshopped or edited, but that doesn't stop you from believing in them. The Solomon Island giants are supposed giants that inhabit the Solomon Islands near Papua New Guinea. The giants are described as 10 to 15 foot tall with dark red hair and are reported to be cannibalistic. Said to live in the deep and untamed jungle, stories describe them moving heavy objects and kidnapping locals. Another known sighting of them was in 1942 and 43, as Japanese and US forces were engaging in heavy fighting during World War II. Japanese soldiers reported during the night that these giants would appear and engage in fights with them. The giants were reported to have not taken damage from bullets and would take men off to the deep jungle to consume them. Considering how unknown and unexplored the area is, it's believed that maybe a race of giants inhabited the island or once inhabited the islands. Local folklore gives basis to this idea, but like I said before, who truly knows? The Smithsonian cover-up is a conspiracy theory that claims that the Smithsonian has destroyed and hidden evidence of giants. The conspiracy is believed to have started from an article from 2014 titled "Smithsonian Admits the Destruction of Thousands of Giant Human Skeletons in the Early 1900s." The publisher World News Daily Report will claim in the article that the Smithsonian suppressed information proving the existence of giants. The US Supreme Court ruling that the Smithsonian would have to turn in documents and declassify files in 2015. The article will garner a lot of attention and I believe started this conspiracy of a cover-up. In reality, there's no evidence of this Supreme Court decision existing, and the publisher didn't have much evidence backing their claims. It's stated in the website that the World News Daily Report is a news and political satire web publication, so the article was clearly a hoax. But that doesn't stop people from still believing in this conspiracy theory. The Giant of Kandahar is a supposed giant that the US Special Forces took down. The story goes that in 2002, a US Army squad went missing in a remote area in Afghanistan, so a Special Forces unit went to go investigate. The Special Forces unit was led to a cave in the mountains, where at the entrance of the cave was littered with military equipment. Suddenly a soldier named Dan was impaled by a giant spear, killing him. The unit would retaliate with 30 seconds of non-stop lead into the giant until it died. The giant was described as 12 to 15 feet tall, red-headed, 6 fingers on each hand, and with 2 rows of sharp teeth. The giant was later airlifted to a base never to ever be seen again, and the Special Forces unit was silenced to not talk about the encounter. The story was spread online in forums and blogs. It wasn't until YouTubers picked up the story and spread it more. But is there any basis that this story is true? Not really, but this alleged story of Special Forces fighting off a giant is really cool in my opinion. And surprisingly, there's more stories involving soldiers encountering so-called giants in Afghanistan. Maybe there's something to these stories, but who knows. Petrified giants is a theory that all giants in the past were petrified for some reason. And the evidence for this is that certain mountains look like giants. You've probably seen these type of videos when you scroll too long on TikTok. Most of the proof are these images of mountains that happen to look human-like or with a face. Clearly this is a case of pareidolia, where we see human features on inanimate objects. These type of videos are prevalent on TikTok, and it's one of those conspiracy theories that gives me brain rot when I come across them. The Japanese parade giant is a reference to this video that shows a giant at a Japanese parade. The video is sometimes used as proof of a giant existing and is claimed to be this old documentary footage. In reality, the video is from a Japanese movie called Big Man Japan, where the main character can transform himself into a 100-foot giant that defends Japan from giant monsters. From watching the trailer, this movie is really goofy and wild. Nonetheless, this video shows up in conspiracy theory videos. I noticed that not all of them, but most conspiracy theory videos use movie clips as evidence, or don't know the footage is from a movie. Make that what you will. The last entry in this iceberg is probably one of TikTok's infamous footage of a giant that was recorded by the TikToker Andrew Dawson. Going by Andy Capped on TikTok, Andrew will post a video where in the mountaintops a supposed giant was spotted by Andrew. The TikTok will gain major attention online, and Andrew will post more TikToks where he will revisit the mountain where he saw the giant. Later on the TikToks Andrew posted were getting more conspiratorial. What I mean by that is that Andrew will claim that some CIA agent will prevent him from investigating the mountains. Another TikTok shows Andrew recording his encounter with this supposed CIA agent, and that supposed CIA agent following him home. And then he posted this TikTok explaining all the videos were fake. But this was also followed by another TikTok where he was frantically saying that the videos were not fake. These set of TikToks makes it look like Andrew is being silenced by some government organization about the supposed giant he saw. Andrew will post one more video showing the mountains with some sort of building on it. Later on, an obituary will be found of Andrew claiming he died on July 1st, 2022. In reality, what can we make from this? Luckily, some TikTokers and YouTubers have covered this story, so from what I got from this is this. The location the supposed giant was recorded was at Canoe Mountain in British Columbia, Canada. And around the mountain tops, you can spot an abandoned communications tower where most likely was mistaken as a giant by Andrew. The claim of a CIA agent silencing Andrew does not make sense, as how does a CIA agent have jurisdiction in Canada? Maybe it was a Canadian version of the CIA, but who knows. But this claim doesn't really hold water. But the real mystery besides the giant is actually whether Andrew is alive or not, as there are no new uploads from his account, and the obituary makes it seem that maybe Andrew did pass away. Nonetheless, Andrew's TikToks will add to the flame of this conspiracy theory that the government was keeping the existence of giants a secret. But who truly knows the whole story of these TikToks? Was the whole thing staged, or did Andrew get caught up in the conspiracy? Who truly knows? Overall, thank you for watching my very first Iceberg video. I kinda always wanted to do an Iceberg video, as the format is very informative and interesting way to lay out information on a specific topic. I don't know if I'll do another Iceberg type video. I'll probably have to find a topic I'm interested in and I feel hasn't been done before. But I do like to entertain the idea that maybe humans have encountered giant versions of themselves in the past. The different interpretations of giants from a variety of cultures shows that humans have a very creative imagination. And I think that shows that we're not that different from our ancient ancestors.